Crisis pregnancy centers have been under fire lately. And joining me now to talk about everything that's going on with that and the latest is CBN Senior National Affairs Correspondent Heather Sells. Heather, thanks for being here.
Hey, you're welcome, Dan.
Yeah, so what is going on? I mean, this has turned into a very political issue, and I'm sure crisis pregnancy centers did not think that, even though they're kind of related to the abortion issue, which is a hot topic, a very divisive topic, I don't know that they thought they'd be quite in the crosshairs like this. What are you seeing here as the latest from these crisis pregnancy centers?
Right. Well, I think what's happened is, we had the Dobbs leak, this majority opinion from the Supreme Court on its abortion ruling that came out in May. And ever since then, there has been a wave of attacks against crisis pregnancy centers and pro-life organizations, also Catholic churches. And so we have been reporting on this. And I think what it really, in a way, though, Dan, has caught a number of us by surprise because just a couple of days ago, a report came out from the Religious Freedom Institute, and they found out that there have been 60 attacks, more than 60 attacks on these crisis pregnancy centers and pro-life organizations since the Dobbs leak in May. They also found out that, cataloged, if you will, that there have been more than 30 attacks on Catholic churches, and more than half of those attacks clearly abortion related. So a lot of crimes against pro-life organizations in this country. And now that we're adding it all up and seeing it for what it is, it's really shocking, and it's really incredible what is happening right now.
Yeah, and you're seeing the Biden administration sort of lean into a few different topics that they view as threats. I mean, he just gave a major speech talking about what he perceived as threats and political, ideological threats to the country. But this seems to be more than just a spat. This seems to be a consistent and pretty widespread rash of violence here against these crisis pregnancy centers. So what are the authorities doing? What is the federal government doing? What, if they're doing anything, what has the response been from authorities?
Right. And just to set the stage, we're talking about violent crimes. We're talking about vandalism with threatening messages. You're not safe. We're also talking about fire bombings. So, this is clearly serious stuff going on. But what the Religious Freedom Institute is also cataloging, they had a former FBI counterterrorism take a look, and they're saying, look, federal authorities are not making a public outcry about this. There are some investigations taking place with local law enforcement, with the FBI, with the Department of Homeland Security, but you are not seeing federal authorities. You are not seeing lawmakers really speak to this issue. The president has said nothing. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi was asked to comment on the attacks and basically dismissed them. And the vice president, Kamala Harris, recently went so far as to say that one's faith traditions, one's religious beliefs should not influence one's views on abortion. And so I really can't think, what the Religious Freedom Institute is basically saying, and I think what we're seeing is there is a deafening silence around this issue from those in charge and also from the mainstream media, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, you don't see any of the normal stories you would see, profile stories, feature stories. And I know you traveled to Massachusetts and talked to some pregnancy centers there, and we'll get your information on that in just a second. But you do see a remarkable lack of interest in what's going on. We talked to a center on this podcast a few weeks ago, and they talked about the extraordinary lengths they're having to go to with security because of the threats that you've mentioned here. So what did you find when you went to Massachusetts? Yeah,
and let me just add to Dan, as far as we queried the FBI on this and I asked specifically, have there been any arrests? Do you have any suspects in any of these cases? The FBI just sent me back a general response, and the lead attorney for NIFLA, which is the main association of crisis pregnancy centers, says there's been no arrests so far. So that's interesting as well. I'm sorry, what was your question, Dan, that you just asked me? I added a point.
Yeah, no problem. The Massachusetts, you recently went up there. I was talking about all the lengths that these centers are going to now that they have to, defend themselves from these possible threats. You got to take any threat seriously, but we don't see that in the media, as you mentioned. But wanted to know what you found when you went to Massachusetts.
Right. And so to be clear, these 60-some attacks against pro-life organizations have been happening in 26 states. So we're seeing both blue and red states, if you will, where crisis pregnancy centers are coming under attack. But in Massachusetts, it's especially interesting because there's different layers of hostility, if you will. At the local level, there are different communities that are looking at ordinances that are going to penalize these pro-life pregnancy centers for what they call deceptive advertising, things along those lines. So that is under debate in a number of communities in Massachusetts, and that's really creating a chilling atmosphere around these crisis pregnancy centers and a lot of concern. And then also in Massachusetts, the Attorney General, who is running for governor and is the Democratic candidate, so we can safely assume she will probably become the new governor, but she has issued a consumer advisory warning against these clinics, which again just creates such a chilling atmosphere for them. And she is saying that some of them don't have licensed medical personnel when they're performing medical services, that some of them are being deceptive. And so that is really an incredible situation for these crisis pregnancy centers in Massachusetts to have this pressure at both the local and state level.
Yeah, and that's interesting that they're being painted in this way. And that's what I kind of meant at the beginning when I said that I don't think that they probably ever viewed themselves being in this situation, because whichever side of the pro-life, pro-choice issue you stand on, it would seem that people helping young pregnant women with their pregnancies would be a task that everybody could be on board with, even if you're pro-choice, because that would be one of the choices that should be available to people. So it doesn't seem like that part of it would be controversial necessarily. But as you're saying, Elizabeth Warren, other people painting them as this sort of villainous sort of vibe, and really as being nefarious in what they're trying to do, which I find incredibly interesting. Have you talked to any of these CPCs and gotten sort of a sense as to how they're kind of digesting all of them being suddenly viewed as basically the villain?
Right. Well, a couple of things. One is that they are definitely on edge, especially in some of these blue states, and they're taking extra security precautions. And so that is a funny feeling for them. And they're also saying, look, we recognize that we've been serving women and their families, but we really now need to make the case to our local officials and our state officials who clearly don't really understand what we're doing. I also talked with Mark Rienzi. He is the president of Beckett, which is a major religious liberty law firm in Washington, D.C. They've been at the Supreme Court a number of times. And he pointed out a couple of pieces which I think are encouraging. One is that the Supreme Court is very strong on the First Amendment and religious liberty. And in particular, there was a case involving NIFLA, this crisis pregnancy center organization, a couple years ago, when in California, they were being forced to put up abortion signs in their waiting rooms, and the Supreme Court rejected that. And so there is great legal precedence for the rights of these crisis pregnancy centers. He was also pointing out to me that, look, we have consumer advertising laws about fraud and deception on the books in most states, including Massachusetts. So if there is a particular case where someone has been deceived, has been a victim of fraud, by all means, these state and local officials should go after them. He's making the case that they don't need extra laws. And so that's an interesting point that, look, if there is indeed fraud, well, let's call it for what it is. And the crisis pregnancy centers made the point to me, too, that it would be against their best interests to deceive someone, because they're built on trust. I mean, they're not going to have women coming to them in their time of need if they don't fundamentally trust them.
Yeah, very, very interesting dynamic to all of this for sure. So how are they responding to all of this, and how do you see the outlook for these crisis pregnancies, and how do they see it? How do they see things going forward, kind of in this new narrative that's been built around them? Yeah,
there's a couple of concerns. There, of course, has been a big wave of this violence in the wake of the Supreme Court ruling, which overturned Roe v. Wade. So perhaps it will dissipate some. But there's also concern that as federal authorities, lawmakers and such, the president himself continue to really remain silent on this issue, that it will embolden these criminals, that they will think we can get away with more. And the religious freedom experts that I'm talking to say this is what we see around the world. When authorities stay quiet, when they are in effect complicit, if you will, to some degree, then it just emboldens these criminals. So that's the concern.
All right, CBN's Heather Sells, thanks for dropping by here for a few minutes, shining a light and continuing to shine a light on this story that a lot of the mainstream media seems to be ignoring. So thanks for being here, Heather. Appreciate it.
You're welcome, Dan.